Amid 12 acres of loft buildings and grimy tenements, 12,000 gather for ceremonies formally beginning a major facelifting for Manhattan's West Side. President Eisenhower prepares to break ground for the new Lincoln Square Center for the Performing Arts.
We were woken up one morning and we looked out the window and we could see nothing but smoke.
A new cultural landmark for the nation, rise just north of Columbus Circle.
We didn't know what was happening as a little kid, but we saw the whole block disappear.
The $75 million project to be completed by 1963 will provide new homes for the Philharmonic, the Metropolitan Opera, and the Juilliard School of Music. To be built nearby, a new campus for Fordham University and a housing project.
Places we used to frequent and the people we knew all of a sudden were gone.
There's a whole lot of tenements, grocery stores, and all that stuff. All gone, just wiped it all out.
People have no idea that that area was ever called San Juan Hill.
San Juan Hill has been lost to the dust of time.
San Juan Hill, Lincoln Square, Columbus Hill. The names have changed throughout the years, as neighborhood names tend to do. Known for diversity during a time of segregation, those streets once housed a tightly knit, largely minority community. It would come to include a mix of artists, intellectuals, and activists. The neighborhood began to develop its unique character before the turn of the century.
You have African Americans leaving the South at the end of the 19th century. They're looking to get away from a lot of the Jim Crow laws. They're looking to get away from segregation.
This is the first freeborn generation of Black people in the South. And they're growing up in a time when any commitment to Black civil rights in the South has collapsed. Conditions are awful in the South. Lynching, violence, and they look to New York as a place of freedom.
They're also being pulled north by the prospect of all different types of jobs, of participating in America's urban new mass culture, which is one of theaters, amusement parks, all different types of modern amenities that are not available in the South. They first settle down in lower Manhattan in the Five Point districts, near where Wall Street is now. They find a lot of racial violence, dilapidated housing, all types of difficult conditions around 1900 make them migrate north around Bleecker Street, Greenwich Village. And this neighborhood becomes called Little Africa.
It had some of the worst housing in the city. Landlords knew that they could rent to Black residents who really just didn't have a whole lot of other options. As European immigration begins to ramp up, particularly from Italy, white immigrants begin to force out Blacks of Little Africa. So where they go next is the Tenderloin, the West 20s to the West 30s between 6th Avenue and 10th Avenue.
The Tenderloin, at least supposedly, gets its name because police officers said if you had a beat in the Tenderloin, you could get so rich on bribe schemes that you could eat tenderloins for the rest of your life.
They were able to connect with all of the different underground economies that existed there. The brothels, the saloons, selling illegal alcohol outside of legal time.
The real thing that people take issue with in the Tenderloin is the presence of these things called black and tan saloons, which were essentially mixed race or interracial saloons.
And they are dancing together, they're sitting and having meals together, sometimes they're having sex together. They see interracial sex as the most horrifying of the vice they see in their city. So white elites are horrified. White people start resisting renting to black people altogether.
As African Americans are forced to move further uptown, they settle in what came to be known as San Juan Hill. It was a mix of Italians, Irish, and German immigrants, and the area would soon house Puerto Rican migrants too. Lincoln Square was located from 57th Street to 72nd Street west of Central Park, and San Juan Hill from 57th to 65th Street west of Amsterdam Avenue. Both had ambiguous boundaries, depending on who you asked and the time period, and both embraced the clubs, hotels, and meeting places around their fluid borders. Some say San Juan Hill was named after the Black Buffalo Soldiers who fought during the Spanish-American War. Others say the name stuck because of violent racial battles that took place in its early years.
The neighborhood then was quite diverse. There were a lot of brownstones filled with lodgers, and those were longshoremen or women working in domestic homes. There were Irishmen, there were Italians, but there were also Caribbean immigrants and increasingly African Americans migrating up from the South.
A lot of people always thought that all blacks lived in Harlem, which was not true. Blacks lived all over.
My name is Mavis Swire. I was born October 10th, 1920. I'm 102 years old. When I was a little girl, the family lived at West 64th Street. The tenement had a wooden stairway. The toilet was in the hall shared by two families. You only had cold running water, and you had to provide your own heat with a coal stove, which was in the kitchen. My mother had the bedroom, and my sister and I slept on a sofa that opened up in the living room.
There was a huge population boom where we grew 4 times our own capacity of a population. So more people had to crowd into less space. So a house that used to be maybe for one family was crowded with 4 or more families.
And it becomes the most densely populated neighborhood in the entire city by early in the 20th century. On a single city block, you could have upwards of 5,000 people. They'd taken lodgers to help pay the rent. Strangers and friends and family mixing together. Many had no outdoor windows or windows turned onto shafts or alleys that were fetid because people would dump their waste out there, including human waste.
A lot of them were fire traps. Landlords did not need to keep up or maintain their buildings because they knew that there were essentially never going to be ramifications for not providing quality housing to tenants.
At that time, the only thing that they were renting to blacks were these tenements. I guess it was segregation. We didn't know that word then.
If you went right outside of San Juan Hill, you had Irish communities. I mean, my father said he used to have to fight on the way and back home from school every day.
Tensions between black residents, the Italians to the north and the Irish to the south in Hell's Kitchen, meant near constant fighting between residents.
In the midst of all of the conflicts, all of the issues of poverty and discrimination in the Tenderloin and then San Juan Hill, there's also this flourishing black bohemia. This is pre-Harlem. This is before what we think of as the pinnacle of black cultural flourishing in the Harlem Renaissance.
The cultural richness of the community would attract all social classes. Broadway theater goers would frequent San Juan Hill social clubs, dance halls, and performance venues. Nearby, the Lincoln Square Arcade housed visual art studios. After studying in Paris, Robert Henry would set up his studio there. His work would depict the serenity of times gone by. George Bellows, whose studio was also in the arcade, was one of the most acclaimed American artists of his generation. The Century Theater and the Park Theater featured performances from light opera to vaudeville and motion picture shows.
You had minstrel shows and that kind of thing. You had that with Shuffle Along by U.B. Blake and Noble Sissel.
I'm just wild about Harry, and Harry's wild about me.
With an all-black cast, Shuffle Along launched the careers of Josephine Baker and Paul Robeson. With more than 500 Broadway performances, the wildly popular play caused traffic jams at the 63rd Street Music Hall for more than a year. Lyricist Noble Sissel and composer U.B. Blake became internationally famous. James P. Johnson also lived for a time in San Juan Hill and often performed at clubs in the area, including the Jungles Casino. Johnson created music for a dance brought to New York City by the people who migrated from South Carolina. That dance would become a worldwide phenomenon.
Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes, the big Charleston contest!
James P. Johnson was huge in San Juan Hill, and that had an effect all over the city because of Charleston.
The Jungles was one famous dance hall, but the whole area was sometimes also referred to as Jungles Alley because there were a lot of similar clubs and social establishments.
James Reese Europe was a schooled musician. He was the resident musician of San Juan Hill. He opened up the first guild for Black musicians. He did the first all-Black orchestra in Carnegie Hall. He joined the U.S. Army, and they made him a lieutenant. He told them, I want to have a big band. In Puerto Rico, I can recruit. And 18 of his brass players he got from Puerto Rico. A lot of these Puerto Rican musicians, philosophers, writers, poets start to come to New York, led by James Reese Europe.
In San Juan Hill, many Puerto Ricans felt they faced less housing discrimination than in other parts of the city. Arturo Schomburg was a mixed-race Puerto Rican, Black, and German activist who migrated to San Juan Hill.
Arturo Schomburg is one of the key figures in the Puerto Rican independence movement of the 19th century. He was 17 when he comes to New York, and he begins to work with the leadership of the movements. They have to live or hold their club meetings in places that allow integrated groups to meet.
The Marshall Hotel, which is owned by James Marshall, a Black man, opens just north of the Tenderloin, just south of San Juan Hill.
The most up-to-date hotel in New York. Cuisine unsurpassed, finely furnished, rooms with bath, rates reasonable.
For the elite of Black life in New York, it's one of the rare places where middle and upper class Black New Yorkers could go and enjoy good food, good music, good accommodations. James and Rosamond Johnson, they're brothers, Black Floridian teachers. They spend their summers up in New York, and they stay at the Marshall Hotel. James Weldon Johnson, most famously, becomes part of the founding of the NAACP in 1909. He becomes a political and civil rights activist.
Marshall's was a place where actors, musicians, and people connected to the political structure of the city would spend time in this atmosphere that was, to some extent, protected from the racial politics of the broader city.
At the turn of the century, San Juan Hill was home to the largest Black population in New York City. Black residents held informal schools, teaching one another music, acting, and art.
San Juan Hill had very strong neighborhood ties. All of these relationships have been built up for decades.
Mr. Allen lived over us. He would use his cane and tap on the floor, and my sister and I would just about break each other's neck trying to get up there, because it meant if you went to the store for him, you got a penny or two. And there were candy stores and ice cream. If you had a couple of pennies, you could have a nice time in one of those places.
In the early 20th century, San Juan Hill became home to a number of churches and community organizations with strong ties to the neighborhood, such as the Stillman Settlement and the Columbus Hill Health Center. The Lincoln Square and San Juan Hill community became increasingly attractive for poor families.
He had nurses, had a dentist, and doctors who came to do physical exams.
Institutions in the neighborhood had a baby station, had classes for young children, classes for new mothers. Because this neighborhood had quite good maternal health care, it becomes a very desired neighborhood for women who are expecting to be giving birth. These women were often boarding with other women who already lived in the neighborhood. Women are helping each other in these sort of small, everyday ways.
At the turn of the century, a woman named Mary White Ovington looked at the housing conditions in San Juan Hill and believed there was a better way.
Mary White Ovington, one of the founders of the NAACP, put her money where her mouth was. She moved to San Juan Hill. She lived among the residents, and she saw what they went through, and she saw the improvements that needed to be made.
And wrote about, interviewed, and kind of detailed the lives of a lot of Black families that lived there. She had dinner with them, she spent time with them, and she had this really sympathetic portrait of the community, getting a lot of white Americans, many of whom were her friends and colleagues in the progressive movement, to think about the communities that they very often just simply overlooked.
Ovington would convince real estate investor and philanthropist Henry Phipps to take the revolutionary step of creating affordable housing for African Americans and Caribbean immigrants. They would be called the Phipps Houses.
The Phipps Houses was on 63rd Street and 64th. As a little kid, you can go in one of the buildings on 63rd Street, and they had a yard between the two buildings. So we used to sneak over and play hide and seek.
They were new, modern homes built to the building codes and standards of the day.
They had heat full-time, which many of the tenements did not. They had running water in the apartments. They had bathrooms in the apartments.
But the bathtub was in the kitchen, and they built a cabinet around it and a top that went over the bathtub, and they used it for a counter.
All of these model tenements include a very large courtyard, better air circulation, better ventilation, better lighting, often playground equipment is going to be erected for children so that they can safely play and they're cordoned off from the dangers of the street.
They were model tenements. It was a new way of living. It was a new idea that maybe the housing, maybe the buildings are what's at fault, and the people who were lucky enough to live there did have a better quality of life.
During World War II, not only did Blacks move out of the South, but so did whites. And so there was just a housing shortage.
In the mid-1940s, some of the tenements would be demolished to make way for another transformation in the neighborhood: the construction of the Amsterdam houses.
Amsterdam housing is not a tenement. This was an attempt partly to eradicate some of the ills Jungle's Alley, some of the main cultural hubs that made San Juan Hill famous or infamous, and provide new housing.
The Amsterdam houses are part of an attempt by housing reformers to supply better housing for the people of that neighborhood and some of the tensions that were plaguing a class society.
The Amsterdam houses were opened first to families of veterans, increasing integration of the neighborhood. By the 1940s, Mavis Swire could afford to move from the tenements into the Amsterdam houses.
And when they opened Amsterdam houses, I applied for them and we got in there. You only got in there when you met their income limit. If you were too far below it or over it, you couldn't get in there.
They kept very close tabs on who was making what. If they thought that you were making too much money, then you would be evicted. My mother was a domestic worker. She cleaned houses, and so her work was off the books. But she was like, don't you tell a soul. That was what everybody in the projects did.
There were some Chinese people, Irish, Italian, Greeks, black, whites. That whole neighborhood was one of the most integrated neighborhoods in the city.
For me, it was a total joy because each of the floors had a different set of people. There might have been an Asian person, someone from Italy, a black family from the South, and there were some blacks who came from Europe. I tasted all kind of food growing up. The parent of my classmate would say, call your mother and see if you can have dinner with us. And I had Italian food one night, Jewish food another night, Spanish another night, and some soul food also. It was really fun.
I moved in when I was 3 years of age in 1954. My father was in World War II. I lived in the housing for about 33 years. My younger sister and my younger brother were born while we were living in the projects. 6, with 3 bedrooms. As I grew older, I always look back and I say, wow, how did we survive? But we did. We did. We were given this privilege of being accepted into the projects. Heaven knows where we would have ended up. I have no idea.
These buildings have an extraordinary history, that they have been the home for a great many of the most prominent blacks in the musical and historical background of this city and this country.
Through the 1940s, the neighborhood continued to cultivate a thriving community of artists. One of those was a world-class musician who was raised in the Phipps houses, having moved there as a child in 1922. The jazz master Thelonious Monk. The neighborhood helped to shape and nurture his unique talent and unique personality.
Now, we used to call Thelonious Monk Peanut.
He was a kid who knew how to play the piano, and that was his claim to fame.
He was magical to look at as a little kid.
We heard him play the piano when they had a dance at the Columbus Hill Community Center. He could go in and sit down and really tickle those ivories.
My grandmother came from Rocky Mount, North Carolina, when my father was 3. We were in the Phipps houses until 1982. I don't think that the Thelonious Monk that history has today would have necessarily been possible in Rocky Mount, North Carolina.
He had strange habits. He would be on the corner of 64th and Amsterdam Avenue, and we would see him swinging around a lamppost. And I'd heard that somebody had asked him, why do you do that? He said, I'm listening to the traffic. There is a rhythm to the traffic. right? We all thought he was off his rocker, but there's some truth to it. There is a rhythm to the traffic.
He was fascinating, dressed to the nines on the corner of 64th Street, swirling in the middle of the street sometime, listening, as I realized that was part of some of his compositions.
He would come out the apartment, he would bang his ring on the pipe, and then he would walk down the long hallway to the front of the building, and then he would spin on the star before he left the building.
Because he was such a famous person, we didn't know it at the time, but people like Barry Belafonte, we'd just come to 63rd Street to see Monk.
I grew up with Dizzy Gillespie in the house, with Miles Davis in the house, with John Coltrane in the house, with Sonny Rollins in the house.
I actually saw Marlon Brando one day going in. I didn't know who he was, but they said, that's Marlon Brando.
When you're in the proximity of other artists, you feed off of each other and you're influenced by them. That's why some of Thelonious Monk's melodies are so easily adaptable to Latin rhythms. You take a tune like Blue Monk, you could interpret it very easily as a cha-cha-cha.
Monk lived side by side in San Juan Hill with an expanding Puerto Rican population. By the early 1950s, nearly 700,000 Puerto Ricans had migrated to the mainland. 85% settled in New York City, and many were motivated by a government program called Operation Bootstrap.
Industry to Puerto Rico means prosperity. The new $1.5 million textile mill joins other industries set out to lift from poverty to prosperity, hence the program's name, Operation Bootstrap. And nurtured by American capital, special credit terms and tax exemptions. It's meant new jobs and new wealth for Puerto Rico.
One of the key components to Operation Bootstrap is the migration of people out of Puerto Rico to the United States, which would lower the population in Puerto Rico and allow the industrialization of the island to take place.
The needle factories were advertising that farm life was slavery, sell your farm, come to New York, the streets are paved in gold, you only work from 9 to 5.
I was born in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and my mother came to the States, all four of us together when she was about 20 years old. That's my mom right there. My mother was a single parent. I lived in a tenement building that was run down on Amsterdam 61st Street. It was a one-bedroom, and we had a kitchen, a sink. My mother and my sister slept in one folding bed, and my twin brother, myself, and other brother, we slept on another twin bed.
Puerto Ricans migrated, landed in places where the neighborhoods were sort of constantly evolving. And San Juan Hill was one of those places.
Although new housing existed for some, many of the arriving migrants had to live in existing tenements.
I recall the paint falling off the walls, and I recall the place being infested with mice. The bathroom for the apartment was out in the hallway, so my mother never wanted us to use the bathroom by ourselves. So one time my brother Gus had to go to the bathroom, so we waited him outside the door when we heard something coming down from the ceiling, and the ceiling had fallen apart, and it fell on top of my brother's head, the sheetrock and some wood materials.
The city blamed the landlords for the conditions. The landlords, in turn, blamed the city.
Don't you feel bad about collecting rents from people who have to live with a rat in the building?
This has nothing to do with rent.
The rent that the people are paying are very little in comparison what they should pay. You tore down so many buildings, and the rents are walking, running around on the sidewalk. You can't clean them out unless the city of New York is going to clean themselves. The Board of Health should clean them out, and the tenants should be educated to have garbage pails, not to invite them to create any rats and mice.
The mainstream media began to describe what was called the Puerto Rican problem.
It was a racist and anti-immigrant discourse that described Puerto Rican migrants as dirty, as diseased, drug addicts, and prostitutes.
In 1957, you have a play called West Side Story that takes as its main characters Puerto Ricans who are newly arrived in New York City. That play is made into a film in 1961. West Side Story is such a powerful film, and it is set in San Juan Hill.
Skyscrapers bloom in America, Cadillacs zoom in America, industry boom in America,
12 in a room in America.
The artists who make the film have no idea who Puerto Ricans are. West Side Story is a great influencer throughout the world. It paints a picture, a portrait of Puerto Ricans that is the least desirable that one would want to see. However,
the best picture of the year named by Fred Astaire. The film is The West Side Story, a musical tale of passions and conflict in New York slums. Best supporting actress, Rita Moreno. Hollywood had a great year and West Side Story topped them all.
I can't believe
the prejudice and the racism against Puerto Ricans is similar to the prejudice and the racism directed at San Juan Hill.
While West Side Story depicted clashes between San Juan Hill's white and Puerto Rican population, New York City was battling its own changing demographics.
By the mid-century, we've had a lot of people who escaped the city. Wanted their dishwashers, wanted their cars, wanted their color TVs and everything that came with the suburban lifestyle.
New cities are not allowed to grow and overcrowd beyond the size that makes them fit for living in. People can even walk to work and have their lunch at home sometimes, just like the kids.
As we were losing population towards suburban flight, we wanted to create plazas, areas where people could gather that were deemed safe. Planners felt this was the way to solve the city's ills.
Already, slums in some metropolitan centers are coming down, condemned by forward-looking civic government. Down they're coming, the cold water, no light tenement. Down are coming the bad living conditions that produce bad citizens.
Some urban planners saw the ills of the cities, crime, poverty, and slum conditions, as being caused by the poor. This was something new. It was meant to reshape cities across America. It was called urban renewal. From the mid-1950s through the 1960s, over 330,000 families were displaced by urban renewal programs across the United States.
Most northern cities now are engaged in something called urban renewal, which means moving the Negroes out. It means Negro removal. That is what it means. And the federal government is an accomplice to this fact.
Hundreds of old tenements are demolished by an ingenious iron ball weighing 3,000 pounds.
The taxpayers in the good areas of the city pay for the slum. Every form of housing decay is found in the slum. Like a cancer, it feeds upon and drains the economy and vitality of the entire city.
The Negro population is synonymous with poverty. Near downtown residential areas have been relinquished to the poor white and to the Negro.
The before picture of a place is often described in terms that suggest dirt, disorder, crime, laziness. What is offered to come is very clean, often very streamlined, very modernist values around orderliness, around behaviors that suggest that people know the rules.
In New York City, a massive plan was put into place in 1955. New York Mayor Robert Wagner would join forces with one of the most powerful and influential men in the city, Robert Moses, a man who had never been elected but had been appointed to 10 positions in public works and government since 1924.
This is the city that Robert Moses built. New York and the area around it was a very different place before Robert Moses arrived.
From the top of the Empire State, Moses can look in any direction and see one of his towering achievements. To the east, one of those incredible Moses peripheral highways, the bend and sweep of the Triborough Bridge. Then the Whitestone Bridge.
So Robert Moses, the power broker, had multiple simultaneous titles, but Mayor Wagner appointed him in 1949 essentially as the czar of slum clearance.
I take that and all the other similar slums. I tear them all out, every bit of them. I enjoy getting things done.
And if that means being lonely in the
process, obstacles that are in the way by whatever means.
And if that means being lonely along the way, that you'll put up with that temporarily, right?
Yes, and make as few compromises as possible.
Robert Moses was interested in creating beautiful places to showcase American democracy, American cultural superiority, and the growth of American capitalism, and to just push that forward.
It was Robert Moses who built Jones Beach, the largest and finest public beach development on Earth.
New York's Jones Beach is a prime example of the work and attitude of Robert Moses.
He doesn't want poor people, and in particular poor people of color, to use Jones Beach. Poor people in the 1920s and 30s don't have automobiles. Buses needed 14 feet of clearance.
The bridge leading towards Jones Beach was built too low for buses to clear, effectively banning people who had to use public transportation.
This is what public works, public policy does to the powerless, to poor people, and how long the effect of it lasts.
The Lincoln Square Development Plan, headed by Wagner and Moses, targeted San Juan Hill and Lincoln Square for urban renewal.
For years, Moses has been accumulating plans and visions of where he would like to do this building all across the metropolis. And Lincoln Square is one of these.
What Robert Moses is thinking about is eminent domain. Eminent domain says that civic and local governments have the ability to declare an area a slum. If someone that owns that space doesn't want to sell it, they can be forced to sell it. The government can buy it, can now own it, and then they can develop public space there, or it can be sold to a private developer, and that private developer can then do whatever they want with it.
When you needed to do a big project, you displaced the people who would make the least stink. And if you declared something a slum, you could get the federal government to pay a large chunk of the fees to build something new.
The individual has to yield at matters of this kind to the entire country, to the advantages, needs of the majority of people. And there's just no other way out. No, there's no other way out.
There's lots of room for abuse at the heart of this, because who's to decide when a public purpose is underway? Who's to decide when something is truly public? Who's to decide who the public is?
I think it's perfectly fair to say that a lot of those tenements would qualify as what we would call slums. But I don't think it's fair to say that the response to that is to tear them down, because that doesn't acknowledge all of the good things built inside them. You had the cultivation of community. Landlords mistreat those residents because there's no political clout in that community. And so the city ignores them. The police ignore them. They allow those conditions to emerge.
So Mayor Wagner and Robert Moses had meetings with the Rockefeller family. So you get the Rockefeller family involved, and you dream up Lincoln Center.
John D. Rockefeller III was the eldest son of John D. Rockefeller of Standard Oil, who had made an immense fortune in railroads and oil and in the sort of industrial growth of the United States in the late 19th and early 20th century.
If you were looking to do a big project today, you'd probably go after Bill Gates, Jeff Bezos, today's power brokers, the people with really deep pockets. In the mid-century, that was the Rockefeller family. So Rockefeller was his own version of a power broker. He was a mover and a shaker. He could organize a lot of big money. He was a big player in New York.
The Lincoln Square development plan would include 9 acres to build Fordham University, 20 acres to construct a luxury housing complex, and hailed as the crown jewel of New York, 16 acres would be used to create Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts.
Here will be a center for the symphony, ballet, drama, and the opera. This will be the home of the New York Philharmonic, the Metropolitan Opera, all united in perhaps the grandest cultural project ever conceived. Chairman of the board of Lincoln Center is John D. Rockefeller.
The announcement of Lincoln Center shocked the residents of San Juan Hill and Lincoln Square. Although they were told they would have better housing as part of the urban renewal plan, they wanted to know exactly where they would live if the project was undertaken.
Almost immediately, a group of residents and business people in the area band together. At first, they're not entirely against urban renewal. They see it as affordable and better housing will be built for working people.
Moses was a master of creating these plans, private funding, city funding, state funding. And then the outcome in terms of the public housing was the least important element. Robert Moses and Rockefeller, they talked about public housing and opportunities for displaced tenants, but their real goal was to create economic growth and to show the world that New York was spectacular.
The people who manage relocation for Robert Moses say they will try to get people apartments in the areas near where they live. The Lincoln Square residents argue that they would like to find homes before they lose their homes. They gather petitions. They write to their elected officials. They stage marches and pickets and other kinds of demonstrations. And they generally just sort of kick up a stink.
We have moms with strollers, business owners, both black and white, coming together to protest losing their homes, and they're saying housing before culture.
They send a sound truck around the neighborhood blaring out the location and the time of the hearings that they'd like to get people to come to and protest. They carry a series of signs that suggest that they are a form of culture in the neighborhood too. Our homes, our livelihoods, our businesses are a form of urban culture as well.
The residents went to court to protest the Lincoln Square development project, but they were no match for Moses's and Rockefeller's power, money, and influence. After a 3-year battle for their homes, the fight was over. In 1958, a judge declared the Lincoln Square, San Juan Hill area a slum, opening the way for the destruction of much of the neighborhood.
Anything that Robert Moses says regarding urban renewal and the dislocation of families, and the dislocation of working class people was ludicrous. He was able to do what he did because he had the support of the monies from people like the Rockefellers, who did consider themselves as master builders. They thought very little, certainly, about raising neighborhoods that meant displacement of working class people.
Now, I ask you, what was that neighborhood? It was a Puerto Rican slum. You want to leave it there? Why? On account of neighborhood business?
More than 7,000 families lost their homes, and more than 800 businesses shut their doors.
Christ, you never could have been there. That was the worst slum in New York. We cleared it out.
In a nod to reality, the 2021 version of West Side Story is framed around the destruction and displacement of the community.
In the newer version of West Side Story with Steven Spielberg, the opening shots are like a sign that says, "Coming soon, Lincoln Center."
Lincoln Center is actually shown as the place that is going to replace that community of San Juan Hill.
The film starts from a kind of birth story with Lincoln Center, with demolition.
We also understand not only is that community going to be demolished, but what's going to come in its place are high-risers for wealthy families.
Lots of new housing with more space. That's what they're slamming in our face. I'll get the terrace apartment.
Better get rid of your accent.
Life can be bright in America.
There were people who were, in some cases, given housing options. And it's my understanding that if you didn't take the first offer, you were usually not going to get a second.
The entire Lincoln Square development plan raised nearly 48 acres of city land. In addition to Lincoln Center, superblocks would be created for a new Fordham University campus and the Lincoln Towers housing development.
They only gave us $50 for moving expenses, which was a fraud. We paid $29.95 where we were. When we moved, we paid $85.96. I canceled my registration to college because I didn't want to leave my parents in a bind. If I would have gone to college, they would have had tuition to pay.
And all these old people, they lost all their friends and customs and everything else and moved to different neighborhoods. It wasn't a daily routine anymore. Like taking fish out of water. Because a lot of people died a year after. 2 years after, a lot of people passed away. And it was terrible.
In 1959, President Eisenhower would attend groundbreaking ceremonies. The New York Philharmonic would play Handel's Messiah to mark the success of the Lincoln Square development plan.
We woke up one morning and we looked out the window and the entire avenue, it was like debris. And the next thing was a smell. kids, right? So we kept asking, what is that? Did you fart? Oh, it stinks, it stinks. I guess it's hydrogen sulfide or whatever.
All of a sudden, these bulldozers and these big construction things was just tearing these buildings down. It was frightening, but then it was, I guess, progress is what they were saying.
Here will develop a mighty influence for peace and understanding throughout the world, the noblest and most shining ideal toward which man can strive and climb.
At first, it was just every day. They took out the entire avenue from 60th all the way to 64th Street, then all the way over to Broadway.
It was a eerie kind of period of time when you didn't see people you knew for a long time, and the street was empty.
All we saw was boards and dust. We just felt lost because now we have no tenements, but yet just boards all around us.
You're not just losing an apartment, you're losing a neighborhood. People knew each other. People were very cordial to each other and helpful to each other.
The demolition of any community of working class people, it destroys more than just the buildings. It erases a community. The owners of the small bodegas in the corner that give you credit. The 1950s is a time when people didn't have telephones. They had a phone that they would allow you to use. The small bodegas that would also have ready-made food. If your kid got sick, you went down to the pharmacist. He was your local doctor.
I lost my whole third grade. A good part of the third grade students that I was with for the first 2 or 3 years disappeared.
Urban renewal changed so many lives and created an entire new neighborhood by such violent means. There was a decision to demolish a neighborhood, remove people, spread them out across the city, and literally make a new neighborhood, one that was far more white, far more wealthy than what had been there before.
Lincoln Center is a product of its era. Part of what Lincoln Center did was it obliterated streets. It created a superblock. It created a plaza. It's a falsehood. It created a level of separation from the city. You're raised above the street level. It's this acropolis of the arts on the Upper West Side.
Urban renewal successfully reshaped the Lincoln Square area, much of New York City, and the United States. But it often destroyed what made New York City and the country unique.
The cure was worse than the curse, right? Worse than the problem. I don't think anybody these days would try to justify urban renewal as a success.
This was always the criticism in modern time of the urban renewal era. It tore down too much and didn't build up enough in its place.
It's the same story that's happened in cities all across the country. They displace working class people to build something supposedly for the betterment of the community and the rest of the city. So they give with one hand, take with the other.
From Philharmonic Hall, the Met, and ultimately the library and the surrounding buildings, Lincoln Square became an area that no one that formerly lived there could afford anymore.
When Lincoln Center was completed, there was a grand entrance on one side with a fountain and a plaza. But behind Lincoln Center, a wall faced what was left of the San Juan Hill community.
For many, many years, it just seemed that Lincoln Center wasn't interested in the community on the other side of Amsterdam Avenue. It was like it was another world.
The back end of the Metropolitan Opera Building is a wall of marble, and it feels as though Lincoln Center is literally turning its face away from that neighborhood.
To me, the wall meant to the community, stay out. We don't want you. At one point, in order to get people to come to Lincoln Center, they would give the neighborhood some free tickets. A lot of people just didn't want to go. Just didn't want to go. I think there was some resentment. There's a place for us could mean somewhere we could move. There's a place where we could live. There's a place where we could raise our family. There's a place somewhere.
Maybe it was a poor neighborhood, but it wasn't a slum. It was hardworking people that shared with their neighbors. We lost our community. We lost something that was beautiful, and it can't be replaced. And you'll never have that again, because it's gone. We got a lot of love then, gave a lot of love in the slums, if that's the word they want to use. But for me, it was my home.
Tonight, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to play you the first number that I composed in 1899. Charleston Rag, ladies and gentlemen.
West 64th Street.
I was born at 248 West 67th Street, New York, New York.
I grew up at 133 West 67th Street.
On West 68th Street, between Amsterdam and West End.
We wound up living at San Juan Hill on 61st Street in Building 108.